James noticed the small round blister pack on the bathroom counter, its silver foil catching the light. Frowning, he picked it up, turning it over. The pack didn't look like anything they normally had in the house. Curious, he set it down and checked the cabinet, then pulled out Rebecca's makeup drawer, searching for any sign of what the pills could be for. At the back of the drawer, behind some old perfume bottles, he found it. A small cardboard package. His heart thudded as he read the label. They were birth control pills. James blinked, hardly able to believe what he was holding. He'd had a vasectomy after their son, Sam, was born, and they hadn't needed any kind of contraceptive since then. He glanced down the hall to make sure the kids, Emily, 6, and Sam, 4, were still playing in the living room. He felt a pang of dread. He didn't want them to sense anything wrong. His mind raced. There was only one reason Rebecca would need birth control pills, and it didn't involve him. James placed the box back exactly where he found it, closed the drawer, and stepped back, trying to process the shock and hurt he felt. He wasn't ready to confront Rebecca, not without knowing the full story. If she was keeping secrets, he'd need to be patient and strategic to uncover them. James left the bathroom, his mind dark with questions and a resolve forming within him. Whatever was going on, he was going to get to the bottom of it. His mind still reeling. At 37, he'd always prided himself on being sharp and observant, traits that had served him well in his career as a marketing specialist. For years, his job had kept him busy on the road, trips to meet clients, long flights, nights spent in hotel rooms working late. But now, with his company allowing hybrid work days, he'd been home more often, closer to his family and his life with Rebecca and the kids. After discovering the birth control pills that morning, however, the comfort of home felt shaken, and his mind kept circling back to his discovery. Rebecca had already left for work, and he was left to handle the kids' morning routine alone. Emily, their 6-year-old, and Sam, just 4, were bundled up in the car, laughing and playing, oblivious to their father's heavy thoughts. As he drove, an idea began to form, a practical solution that would give him answers without alerting Rebecca to his suspicions. He would arrange for a DNA test, just to make sure he was truly Emily and Sam's father. And as the thought settled, another plan took shape. He could install a few small surveillance cameras around the house, cameras with audio, so he could monitor what went on when he wasn't home. He wanted to know exactly what Rebecca did on the nights he worked late, or had client calls. If something was going on, he'd have proof. He dropped Emily off at school and Sam at daycare, all the while running through the details in his mind. He would need to be discreet, take small DNA samples from each of the kids, and find a reputable lab for testing. The cameras would be harder to hide, but he knew enough about technology to set them up so Rebecca wouldn't notice. The following days were a quiet flurry of secret planning. Each time he found a moment alone with Emily or Sam, he'd collect a bit of hair from their hairbrushes or swabs from their toothbrushes. He packaged the samples carefully, sending them off to a lab under a name he made up just for the task. Then, on a night when Rebecca went out with friends, he installed 3 small cameras around the house, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one in their bedroom. Each camera was tucked away, nearly invisible, but capable of recording sound and video with high quality. With everything in place, James finally felt a strange sense of control returning. Now he just needed a way to observe without raising suspicion. One evening over dinner, he casually mentioned that he'd be working late the next week. "Got a new project on top of everything else," he said, feigning frustration. "So, I'll probably be in the office until late most nights." Rebecca just nodded, seeming unsurprised. "That's okay actually," she replied. "Things are quieter for me right now, so I'll have time to catch up on our kids in-house." She smiled reassuringly, and reached over to give his hand a quick squeeze, and James forced a smile back, his mind already churning with what he might learn once she was home alone. The anticipation gnawed at him. Each day he would leave the house, linger in the car a moment, and then drive to the office, readying himself for whatever the cameras might show him. James spent the week piling on extra work at the office, staying late enough each night that he was nearly the last one out. It was the perfect cover. Every evening before heading home, he'd settle into his chair, open his laptop, and review the camera footage from the day. For the first few days, everything seemed routine. Rebecca had taken a couple of days off work to stay with the kids and run errands. He saw her making dinner, taking the kids to school, and even folding laundry. It was mundane, almost comforting. But on Thursday, something shifted. As he skimmed through the recording, he noticed her sitting in the living room, phone in hand, her voice low but urgent. The sound wasn't great, but James leaned in, listening carefully. From bits and pieces of her conversation, he caught a name that made his stomach tighten. Robert Collins, her boss. The way she spoke was not businesslike at all. He couldn't make out every word, but it was clear they weren't discussing projects or deadlines. Phrases drifted through the static. "Meeting, don't worry, and we can make it work." James's hand clenched around the edge of the desk as he watched her, leaning back on the couch, laughing softly into the phone as she twirled a strand of her hair. As he closed the footage that night, a sense of dread clawed at him. It felt like he was seeing a part of Rebecca he didn't recognize, and each passing moment chipped away at the trust he'd once taken for granted. But nothing could have prepared him for what he saw on Friday. Rebecca was in the kitchen, packing lunches and helping the kids get ready for school. Sam, with his backpack nearly half his size, was laughing as Rebecca knelt down to his eye level. James turned up the volume, and that's when he heard her say it. "So kids, when you're done with school today, we're going to visit Robert for a few hours." The children's faces lit up with excitement, and Emily clapped her hands. But before James could even begin to process why Rebecca would take the kids to see her boss, he heard her say something that froze him to the core. "But remember kids, this is our little secret, okay? Daddy must not know about our trip. If Daddy finds out, the evil fairy will come and take him away, and he'll suffer. So we have to be extra careful, all right?" The kids nodded eagerly, their faces solemn as if they'd just been given the most important secret of their lives. Sam whispered, "We won't tell Mommy." And Emily repeated it with an innocent pride that made James's heart twist. James sat there stunned, his pulse thundering in his ears. His mind raced, but it kept coming back to that one horrific truth. Rebecca was hiding something. And now, she was using their children to help her do it. Anger flared within him, raw and fierce, and he almost hurled the laptop across the room. His hand gripped the edge of the desk until his knuckles were white, but he forced himself to breathe, to keep his composure. He needed to stay level-headed. If he lost control now, he'd lose his chance to understand the truth of what was going on. He turned off the laptop, feeling a sickening weight settle over him. The final piece of the puzzle, the DNA test results, could arrive any day. So he waited, anger simmering under the surface, his mind filled with questions he wasn't sure he wanted the answers to. But one thing was certain, the Rebecca he knew was slipping away, and with her, the life he thought he'd built. Before you find out what happens next, please subscribe to the channel. That night, James came home later than usual. The kids were already in bed, and Rebecca was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a tired smile as he walked through the door. "Long day?" she asked, looking up at him. "Yeah, another long one," he replied, forcing a small smile as he leaned in to kiss her on the cheek. The warmth felt hollow now, a formality as he fought the urge to pull away. He held on to his composure, acted the part of the tired but loving husband, asking her about her day, making small talk, even as the image of her secretive words with the kids haunted him. Rebecca didn't seem to notice his inner turmoil, laughing at his jokes, brushing his shoulder affectionately as they went through the evening routine. But as the house settled into silence, and everyone fell asleep, James lay awake, staring at the ceiling in the dark. The lies in his family gnawed at him, filling his mind with questions and suspicions he could no longer ignore. Rebecca's secrecy, the strange trip with the children, the conversations he'd overheard, it was all circling in his head, tightening around him like a vice. By 3 in the morning, he couldn't take it anymore. He slipped out of bed. Rebecca's phone lay on her nightstand, and he grabbed it, his hand trembling as he closed the bedroom door quietly behind him. Locking himself in the bathroom, he stared at the phone for a moment, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He'd never gone through her phone before. They had always respected each other's privacy, but that trust was shattered now. He took a breath, tapped the screen, and began trying passwords, each attempt laced with anxiety. After a few wrong tries, he entered Emily's birth date. The screen unlocked. The screen glowed in the dim light of the bathroom as he navigated to her messages. He scrolled through the usual conversations with friends, her mom, and then found the messages from Robert. His breath hitched as he opened the conversation, each line filling him with a new wave of dread. Some messages were about work, deadlines, upcoming meetings, the usual office chatter. But interwoven were other texts. "Can't wait to see you. About tomorrow, same place. Miss you." James's hand shook, his stomach tightening as he scrolled further. Each message felt like a punch, but it was the last one he read that hit hardest of all. "I can't leave my husband yet. This transition has to be smooth." James felt the floor tilt beneath him. She had been planning to leave him. This wasn't just some momentary lapse, some fling that she'd end. This was something deeper, something intentional. He saw then that the conversation seemed incomplete, like someone had gone back and deleted parts of it. But this message, this confession, had been left behind. Silently, with steady hands despite the shaking inside, he took out his own phone and snapped photos of each incriminating message. His mind felt like it was moving through quicksand, caught between disbelief and the realization that the life he thought he'd built was slipping away. Once he had the proof, he quietly returned Rebecca's phone to the nightstand and climbed back into bed beside her. She was fast asleep, completely unaware of the storm raging beside her. He stared at the ceiling, sleep eluding him as he tried to process everything he'd discovered. James barely recognized himself as he looked into the mirror on Saturday morning. Dark shadows had settled beneath his eyes, and his face looked hollow, almost lifeless. Rebecca noticed it too, her brow furrowing with concern as they had breakfast. "You look tired," she said gently, reaching out to touch his arm. "Are you okay?" He forced a smile, shaking his head slightly. "Just a rough few days. Haven't been sleeping well." Rebecca seemed to accept this, but all weekend long, James felt her watching him, sensing the distance he worked so hard to keep hidden. Each time she looked at him, he fought down the emotions, anger, betrayal, sadness, that threatened to break through. By Sunday night, he was counting down the hours until he could escape the house and go back to work. On Monday just before noon, James's phone buzzed with an alert. His heart pounded as he opened the email. There it was, the DNA test results. His hands felt numb as he read the words over and over, disbelief settling into painful clarity. Probability of paternity, 0%. The world around him felt as if it had dropped away, leaving him floating in a void. Emily and Sam, they weren't his. He was living someone else's lie, raising someone else's children. And with Rebecca's secret meetings with Robert, the pieces fell into place. Robert Collins wasn't just Rebecca's boss. He was likely the father of the children James had been calling his own for years. He took a shaky breath, anger sparking like a wildfire in his chest. There would be no smooth transition, no life built on her lies. He was done. He'd make sure Rebecca faced the consequences. He told his boss he needed the rest of the day off for an emergency, then called Angela Miller, a highly regarded lawyer. He'd helped her with her firm's marketing. Now he was cashing in that favor, but for something far more personal than either of them had imagined. The lawyer's office was quiet and modern, with Angela's degrees lining the walls. She greeted him warmly, her eyes bright but steady. "James," she said, gesturing him into a seat. "It's been a while. You sounded, well, urgent." James took a seat, his body tense. For a moment, he struggled to find the words, but then it all spilled out. The pills, the cameras, the secret meetings, and finally, the DNA results that had shattered everything. Angela listened intently, her expression focused, her hands folded as he laid out every detail. When he finished, she leaned back, exhaling slowly. "James," she said gently. "First of all, I'm really sorry. This is a betrayal on every level. But before you take any drastic steps, you need to think carefully about the path forward. Emotionally this is brutal, but legally, we can build a strong case." James nodded, his anger tempered only slightly by her calm demeanor. "I can't keep living this lie, Angela. She's been using me, and now I'm raising another man's children. I don't even know if they're often going to Robert's house to spend time with him when I'm not around." His fists clenched as he spoke. Angela gave a thoughtful nod, choosing her words carefully. "I understand, and I'm sure you want this done yesterday, but the best outcome here will come if we're strategic. Divorce proceedings can get ugly fast, especially when there's infidelity involved, and children." She continued, leaning forward. "I want you to start protecting your assets now. Gather any important financial documents, account statements, proof of purchases, anything that shows your income and savings. You'll need everything documented if we're going to make this a clean break." James looked at her, his eyes steely. "I want to make sure she doesn't get a dime more than she deserves." Angela nodded. "We'll push for that, but the court will likely consider the kids' best interests, regardless of who their biological father is. You'll need to be prepared. Also, depending on how things play out, we may need to contact Robert as part of the proceedings." "Good," James replied bitterly. "I want him dragged into this. I want both of them to face what they've done." Angela held his gaze, her voice soft but firm. "And we'll get there. Just be patient, James. Let's build this the right way. That means you don't confront Rebecca yet. Let her think everything's normal. In the meantime, I'll get the necessary documents filed, and we'll plan out the best approach to come out of this with you on top." James took a deep breath, feeling his anger recede just enough to see the plan forming before him. Angela was right. He had to be smart about this, for his sake, and for his future. "Thank you, Angela," he said quietly. "I'll do whatever it takes." Angela smiled, a hint of determination in her eyes. "We'll make sure they don't get away with this, James. You're in good hands." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of quiet planning and careful preparation. Under Angela's guidance, James took every step necessary to secure his assets and protect himself legally. Together they documented everything with airtight precision. Angela moved efficiently, drafting a potential fraud charge against Rebecca, including a compensation claim for the years James had unknowingly raised children who were not biologically his. Angela also helped him set up a trust to shield his assets, preserving his savings, investments, and property from being divided in the inevitable divorce proceedings. She crafted a strategy that gave James every possible advantage, preparing him not only to break away from Rebecca, but to reclaim his future. By the time they were ready, James felt a steady sense of determination growing within him. The pieces were finally in place. All that was left was to deliver the papers and watch it unfold. One evening, he found Rebecca in the living room, scrolling through her phone with a relaxed expression. The sight made his heart twist, but he steeled himself, gripping the papers in his hand as he stepped into the room. "Rebecca," he said evenly, holding out the documents. "We need to talk." She looked up, puzzled, but as her eyes landed on the papers, her expression changed from confusion to shock, then to a simmering anger. She snatched the documents from his hand, her face reddening as she scanned the pages. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "Are you seriously doing this?" James crossed his arms, his voice calm but firm. "It's exactly what it looks like, Rebecca. I know everything." Her eyes widened, then narrowed in a flash. "James, don't be ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. You're just paranoid," she sputtered, desperately trying to regain control. He shook his head. "This isn't paranoia, Rebecca." Rebecca's face contorted with rage, and her voice dropped to a low hiss. "James, you're being insane. Think about the children. You're going to destroy everything for them with this madness." He shook his head slowly, his voice even. "No, Rebecca, you did that. You've been lying to me for years, and now you want to use the kids to keep me here? I won't be manipulated. Not anymore." Rebecca's anger turned into desperation. "They're your children, James. You've raised them, loved them. What kind of father just walks away?" But James refused to be swayed. He looked at her steadily, then turned and left the room, his heart pounding as he walked out of the house and drove away. He parked at a quiet overlook nearby, needing space to breathe, to clear his mind. Sitting alone in his car, he opened his laptop, connecting to the live feed from the cameras he had installed weeks earlier. He found Rebecca in the kitchen, pacing in agitation as she dialed a number. He turned up the volume and listened as she spoke, her words raw with anger and panic. "Robert," she said, her voice trembling. "He handed me the divorce papers. He knows Robert. Somehow he found out about everything. It's too soon. He wasn't supposed to figure it out yet." James's pulse quickened as he watched her run a hand through her hair, clearly shaken. "I should have filed for divorce first, like we planned," she continued, her voice bitter. "If I'd done it sooner, I could have locked everything down before he knew what was going on. But your divorce just had to drag out, didn't it? All because of your ex and her fertility issues. I warned you this would happen if we waited too long." The realization hit James with a sickening clarity. She had planned this from the beginning. Every lie, every secret, every word spoken in trust, it was all a calculated move in her twisted game. James whispered a quiet, fervent thank you to whatever higher power had helped him uncover the truth. He was deeply grateful to have caught on in time, to have a chance to protect his assets, his future, and most importantly, his self-respect. He had been blindsided, betrayed, but at least he had found out before it was too late to reclaim his life. Now, with Angela's help, he would see this through to the end. With Angela's guidance, James orchestrated a meticulous legal battle designed not just to end his marriage, but to expose Rebecca's betrayal in full view of the people she had deceived. It was painful, ruthless work, but after years of living a lie, James was determined to hold her accountable. The first step was to ensure that Rebecca's friends and family understood the real reason for the divorce. James provided them with carefully curated evidence, messages between Rebecca and Robert, the DNA test results proving that the children were not his, explaining the years of deception he'd endured. The reaction was swift. Shock, disgust, and heartbreak rippled through her social circles, leaving Rebecca isolated, scrambling to defend herself as she realized the full reach of James's strategy. In court, James took the stand with Angela by his side, confident that he had the evidence to dismantle Rebecca's defense. The messages, the surveillance recordings, and the DNA tests all painted a clear picture. The court listened as James described the years he'd spent believing in a marriage and family that had been built on lies. He spoke of the emotional toll, of the betrayal that had cut deeper than he could have imagined. The judge listened closely, scrutinizing the documents, and ordered that additional DNA tests be conducted to confirm the paternity of Emily and Sam once and for all. But as the trial unfolded, attention shifted to Robert Collins, who had reluctantly been called to testify. He was visibly uncomfortable, his face drawn and anxious. It came out that Robert had been living with a childless wife for years. They had been trying to conceive but had been unable to, something that had always been a point of tension in his marriage. Over the past year, his wife had finally sought a divorce. and their separation had become an ongoing battle over assets and property, tying up Robert's finances and his freedom. The court learned that he had been secretly involved with Rebecca for years, maintaining his affair even while pretending to work things out with his wife. Rebecca tried to deny knowledge of the children's true paternity, claiming that she couldn't have known for sure that Robert was the father. She played the part of the oblivious wife, insisting that James's anger had led him to misinterpret her actions. But the evidence, dozens of messages, their intimate conversations, and the final DNA results, confirmed otherwise. Emily and Sam were, in fact, Robert's children. The judge's gaze lingered on Rebecca, unimpressed by her denials as her entire story unraveled. At the end of the trial, the judge ruled in James's favor. He was granted a legal emancipation from the marriage, absolving him of any future financial responsibility to Rebecca or her children. His assets remained protected, safe from the division Rebecca had once plotted for. The court acknowledged the extraordinary deceit, and awarded him significant compensation for the years he had been misled into supporting children who were not his own. As the gavel fell, signaling the end of the proceedings, a profound sense of relief washed over James. It was the end of a toxic chapter, a closing of doors on the betrayal and heartache that had ruled his life. Free at last, James left the courthouse with his head high, feeling like he had reclaimed his dignity and his future. With Angela's steadfast support, he had won back his life, and now, he was ready to start fresh. The weeks that followed were full of small victories. He moved into a new home, started focusing on his career with renewed energy, and rediscovered the peace he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, James felt whole. The weight of deception was gone, and he was ready to face whatever lay ahead with a clear conscience and a stronger sense of self. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.